Voglio dare questa conferenza in italiano.
I wish I could give my lecture in Italian, but I cannot. But I can speak Italian, but I cannot think in Italian. I think in English. And I have to translate before I speak, and that is not possible.
For that reason, I give the lecture in English with great apologies, because if you went to America and you gave a lecture in Italian, people would just laugh at you. And here I am speaking English in one of Italy's greatest cities to a group of mainly Italian people speaking in English. This is silly, but I'm sorry, I can't do it. And the reason that I can't do it is that my wife, who's sitting next to me in the front row, speaks better English than I do Italian, so we speak English. And because I started to learn Italian at 50 years old, and that's too old a brain to learn a new language. Easily. I speak French very easily, and I learned French at age 15, 16, 17, and 18. No problem. Italian, it's not possible, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. It's a beautiful language, and I wish I could give this lecture in Italian. I also thank you all for coming and hearing this story. It's quite a wonderful story, and I thank the organizers for making it possible for me to be here and tell you this story, in part because I have about 4 different fatal diseases, including the one you notice that forces me to sit in this chair. And so the kindness of people has just been extraordinary, and I want to thank you all for that. I want to thank Lavinia Galli especially for helping to arrange all the logistics for my visit. Also those lovely hostesses like Roberto and Julia who helped me so much. And a number of other people who helped me get in and out of boats, which is very difficult for me to do, to see this wonderful city again before I die. And I think death in Venice is a wonderful, wonderful topic, very dreamlike. I'm not here to find a boyfriend. I'm here to infect you with a new idea about dreams. And I think that's going to be quite difficult. So let me try to do it simply before I start confusing you with images. A journalist just spoke to me and asked me why we dream. Well, we dream because our brains are activated in sleep. Okay? If you activate the brain in sleep, you must dream. And you do. And if you take nothing else away from this lecture, please define dreaming as the psychological concomitant of brain activation in sleep. Okay? You will want to interpret your dreams, and nothing that I say will stop you from doing this. But this is a literary exercise. It is not science. So there is no interpretive scheme of dreams which bears up to scientific scrutiny. So feel free to have fun with it, but realize it's literature. It's not science. What I'm going to talk to you about is probably much less interesting to you than literature. But it's science. At least we know now that dreaming is caused by brain activation in sleep. Now, we also know that the brain activation in sleep is like the activation in waking, but it's also quite different from the activation in waking. One thing is that it occurs in sleep. So the question then becomes, how can you activate the brain without waking up? Well, you do it in 2 other ways. One is you impede the inputs and you impede the outputs. So the brain is offline. So it's activated, but it's offline. So that preserves sleep. Okay? So you have activation, input-output gating. Now you need a 3rd dimension, and I'm going to tell you that the 3rd dimension is that the activation of the brain in sleep is chemically distinct from that in waking, such that you cannot make memories. Hence, your memory for dreams is very poor, and your memory in dreams is very poor. And that would suggest that dreaming might have something to do with memory, but it's very counterintuitive because what your dreams are actually associated with poor memory. So what's going on? I'll try to hit at some of the answers to that question. But let me repeat what I've told you now. Dreaming is associated with brain activation in sleep. You cannot activate the brain in sleep without causing dreaming. The brain activation of sleep is different from the brain activation of waking In that, inputs and outputs are blocked. They are gated out. Whereas in waking, you are processing what I'm telling you. And you could move if you wanted to. If you didn't like my talk, you could get up and leave. But you can't do that in a dream. And yet, in the dream, you are also imagining that you're moving. So the activation is not only wake-like in the sense of activation, but it's wake-like in sense of the experience. You move in your dreams, okay? So that should tell you something. Why do you dream? You dream because the brain is activated in sleep, but that's not why you move. You move because movement is important. And what I'm going to try to get you to do with me today is to realize that dreaming and dream interpretation have been absolutely misunderstood because they have been considered to be a reaction to waking. And that's why Shakespeare is wrong. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, a journalist said to me yesterday. No. We are such stuff. We are made from dreams. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that the activation of brain in sleep is in fact progressive. It is not a replay of yesterday's experience. It is in part a replay of yesterday's experience, but it is also the playing out of a genetic program for movement, for sensation, for feelings, emotions, all the rest of it. And that's what the proto-consciousness notion is about. Now that I know, I've already talked for 7 minutes, I think I'm going to dispense with a lot of the slides. But I do want you to see some evidence of the brain activation in sleep. So I want to show you a DVD that shows 3 different evidences of brain activation in sleep. The first is a sleeping woman, and what you're going to see is her eyes moving. Then the second is a cat's eye moving in the same state of brain activation in cat sleep. The mammals share this process of brain activation, and that should have tempted us to realize that there's something more than just dreaming, because we don't really think, maybe cats and dogs dream, but they don't dream the way we do, and dreaming is probably not so important to those animals. But activation of the brain in sleep is very important to those animals. It's very important to all the mammals, not just humans, and it's important to birds. And mammals and birds are the only animals that regulate body temperature. Now, you'll be very surprised to hear a lecture about dreams that's going to tell you about body temperature, because you would never intuit from dream interpretation anything about the control of body temperature, would you? Honestly? Let's hear the answer. No. No, you would never intuit that. So let's go ahead and look at this. Okay, let's look at the woman first. This is the wife of one of my colleagues, and he. Now look very closely at see the eye, see the eyelid jumping around there. Now this is available light in the early morning, and you can observe this in a bed partner or any willing subject, a child. You can observe this, and for thousands of years, this observable fact, eye movement in sleep, was possible to see, and it was never seen. It was never noticed. It may have been seen, but it wasn't noticed, and that's because there was no hypothesis. And in fact, when Azarinsky and Kleitman discovered the activation of the brain in sleep, there was no hypothesis either. But Kleitman realized that this might have something to do with dreaming, so he told Azarinsky to go wake the subjects up. And can we see that? Let's see that again. Let's see the woman again. Oh, if you don't mind. If I wake her up now, I have a 95% chance of obtaining a dream report. Detailed, vivid, movement, hallucinated sensation, strong emotion, bizarre thinking, all the rest of it. It's correlated. Dreaming is correlated with REM sleep. REM sleep is a state of brain activation. Now, the next video, let's go ahead, is a cat's eye. And it enables me to praise Giovanni Berlucchi, who made this film in the early 1960s. And I saw it in Lyon, and I was recently in Verona. Thank you, Veronese, for this opportunity. Here you see these eye movements. And why do you see them? You see them because Verlucchi has put a stainless steel cylinder in the eye of the cat to hold it open. But if you have a pet cat, you can do the same thing with an eraser. I'm telling you these things because you can make these observations for yourself, and I hope you will, especially if you're a student interested in this. Can we see that again? Look at these are the so-called saccades, and I was talking to another member of the audience this morning about a saccade, and a lot of you don't know what a saccade is, but you don't see unless you move your eyes. Now, this cat is asleep, moving his eyes. Why is the cat moving its eyes when it's asleep? Because it's practicing saccades, and it's using the saccades to actually generate information inside the brain. So the second point that I want to make here is not only that there is brain activation in sleep, but the brain activation in sleep is highly organized. And it is organized in such a way as to make us believe that sleep has something to do with waking, but it's the other way around from what Peter said. Peter said that waking, is that sleep is a response to waking, and that's true. But it's also true that waking is a response to sleep. And you probably never thought of it that way, except that you feel better after a night of sleep, but you don't realize that your brain has been doing all of these impressive calisthenics for you while you were asleep, running your saccade generator, running all of the information processing that's associated with saccades. Because if your eyes don't move, you don't see. So vision depends on eye movement. What is more interesting than the fact that you move your eyes 4 or 5 times a night for an hour and a half? You're just in a shop, you're in a motor shop, and you're running eye movements around, and your brain is processing all the data about the eye movements. And as Dr. Moroni said yesterday, if the eyes don't move, you don't see. Okay? But the visual world is stable, despite the fact that your eyes are continuously moving. You're making saccades at a rate of 20 per second right this minute. And yet, the visual world doesn't dance around. The brain is calculating the effects of each and every saccade 20 times a second. This is a fabulous amount of information processing. Huge amounts of neuronal machinery are devoted to this process, and it's all unconscious. It's all given. And people have speculated about this for 3,000 years. Now I think we're on the dawn of a new age with respect to the brain and the mind, and with respect to brain science generally. And I would applaud what you said earlier about the need to support this in Italy. In the United States, there are now something like 25,000 people who come to the annual neuroscience meeting. And each of those persons is a scientist doing work. What's the number in Italy, would you say? 200 or 300, probably. I don't know, maybe 3,000, but certainly not 40 anyway. So I would applaud what Dr. Veronese is doing as a visionary. I love this idea of him as a visionary, because what we need is more understanding that we are on the dawn, we are on the threshold of the greatest advance in human understanding since the Renaissance. And yet we're gloomy about the economy, we're gloomy about Iraq, we're gloomy about Afghanistan and all the rest. From an intellectual point of view, we are on the threshold of the most exciting era in the history of mankind. We will understand ourselves. It might take 500 years, it might take 1,000 years, but it's going to take a lot of money. And so we need foundations, and we need governments to support this kind of work. Okay, so let's now look at the twins. These are my twins, with Leah Silvestri, who's the most helpful person in my life, gets me in and out of boats as well as. And this is something you've all seen but never noticed.
Sequence is this.
Look at the eye.
Peculiar eye closing and opening, and it's not quite clear whether the guy's really asleep or not, but he's fed and looks to me like he's falling asleep. And as the eyes close, you notice that they move quite a lot. And in some cases, like right there, you could see some little nystagmiform eye movements. There's another sequence, lateral, medial, twitches. And so this is probably sleep onset REM, or the equivalent thereof in the newborn infant.
Okay, let's take the video off now, because
he doesn't have abolition of muscle.
You see it. You saw it, didn't you? You saw that when the baby is going to sleep, having nursed, he enters directly into a state of brain activation with eye movement. And the newborn human infant has 4 times as much REM sleep as we do as adults, 8 hours a day. And that maps progressively upward with prematurity, so that at about 34 weeks, it's 100% of the time. So in utero, your brain is being activated and your eye movement generator system is being created. And later on, when you're 5 years old, you remember a dream, because this is associated with consciousness, just as waking is associated with consciousness, but it's dream consciousness, not wake consciousness. In other words, you have vivid perceptions, you sense yourself moving, you sense that it's always you who's having the experience, there's a sense of agency about it, and there's a sense of volition about it, which is obviously totally misleading. You cannot exercise volition in sleep, and you can't remember the things that happen. So again, we can take that off now if you don't mind. And now we'll go to a few slides very quickly. So if this story interests you, and you're a student especially, you can find this article, REM Sleep and Dreaming, Toward a Theory of Proto-Consciousness, in Nature Neuroscience Reviews in 2009. Okay? Now, if you have trouble finding that article, just send me an email and I'll give you the PDF. But what I want you to understand is what I mean by the concept of proto-consciousness. I think that consciousness begins no later than 30 weeks of gestation. And consciousness begins as a proto-state, in that in order to be conscious, you need to move your eyes, you need to see, you need to process all that external data, and you need to integrate it with emotion, and you need to integrate it with movement. How do you do this? Well, your brain does it for you. And your brain is well practiced by the time you're born at doing the basics of consciousness experience. Consciousness is, in this sense, primary. This is the state of consciousness that we share with the animals. And I love Frans de Waal's wonderful presentation of mentation in animals. They obviously have it. We like cats and dogs because they share with us primary consciousness. What they don't share with us is secondary consciousness. They don't have language. Even birds, which have REM sleep and share with us REM sleep, do not have a very impressive language. Yes, they talk to each other. Yes, there are calls. But, I mean, they're not sitting in this lecture. You are. And hopefully you're understanding a little bit of what I'm saying. It's remarkable that language is so important to us as a species. And it's very important to us as a species because it enables secondary consciousness. Secondary consciousness is abstraction. It's language, mathematics, science, literature, all those things that the humanists correctly hold dear to themselves and point out to us. These are our attributes. This is the science of humanity. This is the science of the human experience. We are there, and we need support for this work because we are now on the threshold of understanding the scientific basis of humanity. And if I were going to tell you One thing to remember. You've got a little card like mine, and it's got the logo on it. One side of the logo, there's a baby. You see the baby's head, and then the baby appears to be looking at the world. Okay? This is a mnemonic for remembering my lecture. What we need to do, this looks like a stereoscopic view. It looks like two separate subjects. But what I want to do in this lecture is to suggest to you that these two things are one. That the baby has a world inside his head. It's not like this map. This map is a function of secondary consciousness. The baby doesn't have a map of the world in that sense in his head. But the baby has a map of the world in another equally important sense. He knows he's a proto-self. He knows he's an agent. He knows he's moving. He knows he's moving in a space. He knows he can see. All of these things he brings to his birth and to the experience of human life. So if I were going to say what the future of science is, it is making this into one image. And so the baby, when he goes to school, will understand the map of the world. But what we need to understand is that the baby already has a map of the world in his head. And I think that's a very genial and probably scientifically valid idea. So if I were going to suggest to the organizers of this magnificent conference a theme for the future, it would be the development of the brain. We've heard a lot about that already today and in previous sessions. But it is a very important subject. And let me repeat what I said to you earlier, that REM sleep exists, this state of brain activation exists in utero in order to convert a necessarily limited set of genetic instructions. The genome cannot provide anything more. It tells what there are 100 billion neurons. It tells them where to go. It tells them what flavor they are. But it doesn't tell them how to interact. They interact spontaneously. And so REM sleep is a spontaneous state of the brain which is designed, I suppose designed is a crude word. It occurred by evolutionary chance that animals that were able to anticipate and predict reality were going to be more successful than animals that couldn't. And I think that's what REM sleep is trying to tell us. Let's go ahead and look at some of these slides quickly, and I will. I'm looking at the clock, so I will try to. So proto-consciousness, you understand what that means? Next. Oh, this is mine. Okay. Now, this is a Dali painting, a surrealist image of the dream, and it could be interpreted as a piece of literature, but it could also be approached formally. It's very visual. It's very hyper-associative. It's very bizarre. It has all these qualities that I call formal. And those are the ones that map very well onto the brain, whereas the literary side of things is not yet ready for brain reduction. And just so you don't think I'm just a stupid neurobiologist, these are a number of studies that we've done about dreaming from a formal point of view. We throw away the idea of interpretation, and we look at dreaming as a mental state with certain formal features, like visual intensity. We compare that with waking. With memory, we compare that with waking. Visual intensity is increased, memory is decreased. So this is all I'm going to tell you about the formal analysis of dreaming, but you can do this too. You can look at your bed partner, see REM. You can look at your cats and see REM. You can look at your babies and see REM. And you can look at your own dreams and do formal analysis. And no one but me in the whole world is doing formal analysis. And all you need is a paper and pencil to do formal analysis. Someone told me that they just had a dream last night about a friend that they haven't seen in 20 years. How common is that? How common is remote memory in dreams? We really don't know the answer. I told her that I thought it was evidence that remote memory exists in dreams. It does. And so there is some memory in dreams. And remote memories are more common, I think, as a hypothesis, than recent memories. So one paper and pencil test you could do would be to compare the incidence of characters from your previous life with your present life, and that would be publishable, believe it or not. So let's go ahead. Oh, no, okay. So this just shows you the methodologies used. I don't have time to go into the details. But I do want to show you a little bit of scientific data so you don't think I'm just making this all up. The periods of brain activation that you see there, and I'm going to, oh, my goodness, what did I do wrong? Let me see now. Okay. I can see the laser dot, and you can't. But you can probably see the blue bars over each period of brain activation. So there's quite a lot of brain activation in sleep. It's something like 15 to 25% of normal adult sleep. And as I pointed out to you, it's more like 8 hours a day. It's 4 times as much in the newborn infant. And in utero, at 30 weeks, it's something like 80 to 100%. So the idea of brain activation and its association with dreaming is, I think, a scientific reality. And this just shows you one cycle to emphasize the 4 periods of non-REM sleep in green there, stages 1 to 4. And those are times when you probably don't dream, or at least you don't dream vividly. You don't dream in an hallucinatory fashion. Whereas the minute your brain activates in the blue part, then you start seeing things and you imagine yourself running around and, all the rest of it. Now, the point I want to make about this slide is mainly to call your attention to the lower part of the slide. Let's see if I can, well, it doesn't matter. You can't see the pointer anyway. That's the brain stem in sagittal section, showing you an aminergic neuron and a cholinergic. Aminergic neuron in red and a cholinergic neuron in blue. And right now, your brain is dominated by the aminergic neurons. You can't pay attention to this lecture. You can't remember anything, including my simple mnemonic here, which I remind you of, unless your aminergic system is working. And your aminergic system is delivering to your entire brain norepinephrine and serotonin, okay? Without which you cannot be awake. And look what happens when you go to sleep. It starts to go downhill, and it reaches a low point in dreaming. So dreaming could not be more different from waking in terms of aminergic modulation. And that's the third point that I made to you earlier about the difference between waking consciousness and dream consciousness. The brain has changed its mind as completely as is possible. And at the same time that the aminergic system is going downhill, such that you lose memory, the capacity to think, all the rest of it, orientation goes out the window. Your capacity to image, to move your eyes and see things, to believe that those things are real, to have real feelings, and all the rest of it are increasing as a function of the cholinergic system's increased excitability. Well, let's go ahead now. Now, this is a dramatic graph of the evolution of the states of consciousness in human life, going from 0, the time of birth, to the moment of conception, and somewhere in between those 2 points, you start to get the REM sleep system turned on. And the point of this slide is to emphasize to you that REM sleep is proto-sleep. It occurs before waking in development. Therefore, it must have a developmental forward-looking function, as well as the retrospectoscope that we generally use for it. Now, notice how much of it is preserved throughout sleep. But the bad news is, of course, that waking in red is getting more and more common. It's harder and harder to sleep as you get older. Now, the other point that I want to make clear to you is that REM sleep has evolved twice in evolution, once in birds and once in mammals. And mammals are not big birds, and birds are not small mammals. They're different. They're totally different. And yet, both of these species have a very elaborate wake state behavior, and they control body temperature, and they have a lot more REM sleep when they're young. All of these things are true. So the take-home message is that REM sleep is an early state of development and a late state of evolution. It only occurs in those animals, even though it's controlled by the brain stem, which is a primitive part of the brain, it is in the favor of the cortex and the thalamus. And so the idea that consciousness depends upon this offline activation state, I think is very compelling and very interesting. Now, just quickly, I see I have 2 minutes left. You heard this morning an elegant lecture about the development of the brain, a lot of things that I didn't know. Most of this is my imagination, but there is a tube, and then there's a tube with a lot of different parts to it. And what I'm emphasizing is this blue part in the middle, and I'm showing I'm red. Oh, my goodness, I'm in red. Well, that means that's a warning, isn't it? Okay, so I've got these cholinergic and aminergic neurons sitting next to each other, and I've done this by genetic instruction. Now it's up to them to interact. And they interact spontaneously, and that's why we dream. Now, I'm tempted to go through the rest of the slides, but I won't. It's 30 minutes, and I will just read a poem. And if any of you knows the author of this poem, meet me at the Café Florian tonight at 10 o'clock. Okay? Dreams, those dreams that on the silent night intrude, and with false flitting shapes our minds delude. Jove never sends us downward from the skies, nor do they from infernal mansions rise, but all are mere productions of the brain, and fools consult interpreters in vain. Thank you very much.